Adam, thank you for joining us. For those of you who are watching who it's the first time doing a Digital Drams, welcome. We kind of run these, try and do it every couple of weeks. And yeah, we want them to be kind of really interactive, getting loads of questions, loads of tasting notes as we taste through. And as always with a lot of our Diageo tastings, we've got a couple of bottles to give away tonight. So Adam's going to be asking some questions throughout, which will be the way to win a couple of those bottles. We're also going to do one for the best question asked from you guys and the most interesting tasting note, as well as the traditional one. And I'm sure some of you might have already done this. I haven't checked the Instagram, but if you on our socials at MyWClub, either Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, if you take a picture of your tasting setup and tag us, and we'll pick one and send out a bottle as well. So we're giving away a few prizes tonight to try and increase maximum engagement. Well, that's enough chat from me. Adam, do you want to first obviously introduce yourself and your role with Diageo? Johnnie Walker brand ambassador, I believe, but also the lineup that we're going to be doing them in tonight, so that people can kind of get poured and ready.
Yes, of course. So as was just said there, my name's Adam. I'm the Johnnie Walker brand ambassador for the UK. I'm based in London at the moment. I actually only started the role about 6 months ago. Prior to that, I worked in luxury hotels and various other whiskey bars in New Zealand and Australia. But since moving to London, I worked in the Artesian at the Langham Hotel and the Nomad Hotel in Covent Garden, if anyone's familiar with those. But the lineup today that we have is one, delicious and really exciting. I have mine laid up in front of me already, so perhaps I'll start a second Instagram account and tag a photo and perhaps win one of the bottles. So the way I like to do these types of tastes, and particularly the Four Corners and then Blue Label, is, in my opinion, lightest to heaviest. So I like to start with Glenkinchie, and then normally, so sort of that lowland region, and then Cardew, or normally Cardew, but we're going to do Benrinnes today instead. A really underrated and unsung hero of that region, and especially a vital cog in the whole Diageo machine. So then we'll go to Benrinnes, and then we'll go further north to the Highlands and do Clynelish afterwards. And then we'll head over to Islay and do Caol, and then we'll finish on Johnnie Walker Blue Label. So Glenkinchie, Benrinnes, Clynelish, Caol, and then Johnnie Walker Blue. Just to repeat for anyone who wants to up their tasting drams already.
Marvelous. And how do you determine the weight of the whiskey?
So for me, it's...
Sorry, that was a bad joke.
No, I mean, normally I just put it on a scale, right? So I've got my little scale weight up here as well. I always make sure to have it set in case someone does crack that. But I'm going to take that from now on actually as well.
I get everyone to pick up their samples and say which one they think is heavier.
which one they think is heavier, right? I mean, unless some people have already tasted some of them or cracked it, so all the air got out, So normally we would have Cardew in here, but we're going to do Benrinnes, so a little bit of a change up. So these are the four brand homes of Johnnie Walker, right? Has anyone actually tried or tasted these before? Just so I can start off with a nice question. You can type into the chat. You can say which ones you've had, if you've had all of them, some of them, none of them. For these ones, I'd like to see who's actually tried any of them as well. I know they can be quite a staple in people's collections, but it's always exciting if someone's trying something for the first time or someone's trying something new as well.
Sorry, I've had a brain fart moment there. We're going for Benrinnes first, are we?
We're going to go for Glenkinchie first.
Glenkinchie first. Apologies. Sorry, that was
no, of course.
that's how I had them lined up, and then asking for a friend. We've got a couple of people. A couple of people in there said David's tried all apart from the Benrinnes. Jerry's tried all of them. Ian's tried all. Andy's tried all, except for the Clynelish, or tried the Clynelish 14 before. Sorry. Kirsty's tried just the Caol.
Nice.
Not had the Johnnie Walker, but tried all the others in various guises. Christian says tried Glenkinchie, Benrinnes and Clynelish. Was at Glenkinchie last year, great tour. So yeah, there's a lot of people. Obviously, I mean, they're iconic brands, most of these. Yeah, so I'm not surprised.
I mean, it's always great to see people who have tried all of them, haven't tried some of them. I've only tried one or two as well. So get to break down those barriers and really grasp the understanding of what's going on inside the bottle and outside the bottle as well. So the four brand homes, so each representing a different style of whiskey from different whiskey making regions. Okay, these are the four iconic styles, four iconic whiskey making regions of Scotland, and they all produce even though there's a lot of distilleries within each of the regions, they all produce very different styles, even though they all come from the same 3 ingredients. So there are a range of licensed distilleries in Scotland, and us being Diageo own 28 malt distilleries, 1 experimental and 1 active grain distillery as well, which is Cameron Bridge being the absolute workhorse. I've got a little bottle behind me somewhere actually as well. I don't know if you can see it past my massive head on the screen though. So each distillery has their own characteristic, their own flavor, and their own way of producing whiskey. However, as a general, I just want to take a broad approach to the sort of styles and flavor of whiskeys from different regions. So we take things like the Highlands, right? So varied and tropical throughout the region. Could be coastal, could be more inland. Things like tropical fruit to really that sort of coastal maritime influence. I was actually at Clynelish about 6 weeks ago. First time being in that region and being at that distillery, and you have these massive sort of ceiling to floor windows, and on a really nice day, which it was thankfully, you can see right down to the beach a few miles away. So you understand that sort of coastal maritime influence as well. Speyside has that full of orchard fruit, that sort of acidic citrus force, so like lemon drop, pear drop style of our characteristic and flavor. Islay known for a sort of peat dominant flavor, which is what we really want to get from Clynelish here as well. And the lowlands that tend to be more delicate and grassy. I see, Luke, you're smelling and tasting whiskey there. Has anyone got any sort of tips and tricks as to how they smell whiskey or how they taste whiskey as well? If anyone wants to type in there.
I like to use my nose personally. I think it's
like to use your nose. Yeah, normally I like to use that one as well. In terms of if people haven't done whiskey tastings before, I know these types of meetings and ranges have a whole range of people, a whole plethora of people. What I like to do personally is put my nose in, but breathe in through my mouth. So this removes that sort of ethanol characteristic, and do that 2 or 3 times. It's kind of like, patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time. That's going to look really good whenever people are like, now they've got the context, but on the recording, I'm just sitting doing this and like, what is going on? So I know some people like to put their hand over and sort of swirl it around and then breathe it in as well is another good one. Or if you get it on your hands like me, you can rub it on your hand and breathe in that way as well. There's a few different ways, and it's really what's finding the way that's best suited for you and for your palate and your sense of smell.
Again, I'd be similar to you, Adam, in the sense that with the mouth open, but I would breathe through the nose.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's obviously, for anyone who's as you were saying, a broad kind of spectrum of background and experience on here. So your palate doesn't actually pick up much at all. All of our tasting, heavy lifting is done through the nose, even when we're consuming orally.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's definitely the top trick is always have the mouth open when you're nosing, whether you're breathing in through the mouth or the nose.
Correct. So we've really gone through what we're going to taste. Some housekeeping rules. I would suggest there is going to be 5 drams, and if you are trying all of them, I wouldn't have all of it in one go to start with. It's not responsible drinking, but I would save some and then come back to them after you've tried sort of the next one, or after you've tried them all, and then you compare and contrast as you go through. Grab some water, so 1 water to drink, as we're going to be doing 5 quite large drams, and then even some water to drop into your whiskey as well if you want to try it with and without water. It does change the character. So whiskey in general is a chemical solution with some some soluble fats in it as well. So as you drop in some water, some of those chemicals compounds dissolve, and so it changes the smell and the taste of the whiskey as well. And on that note, I know I could ramble on and on and on and on and on, but what we're going to do is we're just going to jump straight in and try our first whiskey, which is the delicious Glenkinchie Distillers Edition, which comes in this beautiful little bottle. So what makes a Distillers Edition? And before I ramble on, I want everyone to grab their first whiskey, have a smell, and if you can or you want to, type into the chat and let me know what you think in terms of the smell, and if you've already tasted, I've seen some people have, what you think of Glenkinchie Distillers Edition.
Well, Jamie says very fast legs.
So do I have very fast legs too.
I wish I could say the same. I'm notoriously slow. James says, as mentioned on the nosing, that it brings back to mind the video of the guy tasting whiskey who throws it away, which I think is Richard Patterson, isn't it, from White?
Yeah, Richard Patterson.
Yeah, very, very iconic video. Good reference, James.
Amazing video, actually.
Chris Tanner says, what age is it?
So this one is it's bottled or distilled in 2009 and then bottled in 2021. So I think it comes in 2008. So it comes in as 13 years old actually for this one.
Oh, interesting. But it's a non-age statement on the bottle, is it?
It's non-age. So I think all the distillers editions from this year, apart from the Talisker, were non-age statements as a way to take away from that. You know, the big whenever you get a big number on the front of things, a lot of people get detracted from what's inside the bottle and are more interested about what's on the front of it, right?
Or a small number, yeah, but vice versa.
People
dismiss it when it's actually a Savage whiskey, yeah. Andy has said citrus lemon on the nose. I'm gonna give probably the most pretentious tasting I've ever given in my life. People who join the Digital Drams regularly, they'll know that that's going some. But I actually did a sourdough starter this week, where I've been kind of, you know, slowly adding to it, waiting for it to kind of ferment and cultivate the yeast. And it's got that kind of sour, malty, bready sourness on the kind of on the nose in a really good way. So there's one really, you know, pretentious tasting of the month. Reverend Kevin Wright says very light on the nose, heather, fresh pine notes. Craig says getting dates. It's always been difficult for me. Citrus, a little hint of rum vibes. So sugarcane. So excellent tasting notes. Yeah,
really good
so far. Can you remind us of the cask makeup of this again?
Yeah, of course. So I'll just run into that now. So just I guess to start as a broad overview is what actually makes a distilleries edition. So Diageo actually output a special release of liquids every year since 1997 that house these limited edition bottles and these limited edition liquids that have been double matured or have an unusual cask finish. So at Diageo, we actually have about 10.5 million casks in reserve at any one time. After I was just at Canvas at Menstrie during that last trip about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and that's what they said at the time is 10.5 million, which is about 3 times the size of the population of Scotland from what I last checked. I mean, if everyone can drink 3 casks of liquid throughout a year, I'd be very impressed. So essentially what we do is in that experimental distillery or in our science innovations lab is constantly test creative liquid and creative innovations and see what works and what doesn't. You know, not everything that they try is going to work. So the reason for the second maturation period is to provide subtle flavors that complement or like really perfectly complement their already exceptional liquid. So this is actually finished in Amontillado sherry casks or Amontillado sherry butts, which just give that, you know, subtle nuttiness where the as someone said that date flavor as well, and then you crack that really good joke, which again I'm gonna take to. I mean, I'm learning a lot here as well. So
I think good joke. You're being polite, Adam. They're good because they're so bad. That's the point.
Exactly, which is the whole point. You know, it's the whole definition is to make a joke so bad it becomes good. That's whenever it's transcended.
Exactly.
So I mean, this in the Amontillado sherry cask get that real, that sort of biscuitiness as well. It gets that sort of biscuit dryness, but keeps that malty profile for sure. For me, it gets almost like a dry wine, and has this rich nutty note, this rich nutty undertone. I think that sort of sourdough starter characteristic is great, and then it has that, for me, almost like an apple pear quality, and ginger, that like a small gingerbread spice on the nose. And it has this oiliness for me too. It's carried and pairs amazing with the dried fruit, which just goes to show why sherry and sherry influence is so heavily used within the entirety of the whiskey industry, right? And then the back palate is this sort of creamy apple vanilla character, but still stays quite light, and it finishes quite long as well. It's almost a little moorish, you know, it keeps you coming back. But this for me is a real step up from the 12-year-old. And I don't know if anyone has water by their side, but I would try with a little drop of water as well and see the comparative difference between these two.
I'll add a drop of there myself. Kirsty says sweet grapes, malt, hint of wood. Stuart says nose very light, agree with the sourdough. We've got sweet grass, malty, white fruit. James has said for your 3 cask a year challenge, he said if you supplied them, you'll accept the challenge. Philip has said white fruit, honey, and heather leading to citrus oak, a nice note of baking spice on the finish. Kirsty said she's not picking up too much dried fruit from the sherry, much more winey. I suppose Amontillado is one of my favorite types of sherry, but it doesn't have the kind of dried fruit flavors that a PX or Oloroso have. It's much more nutty, much drier. So I suppose that might I don't know, maybe not, maybe I'm totally wrong, but that might be why that those kind of dried fruit place those kind of suppose typical sherry characteristics aren't
Yeah.
coming through maybe. Bob says well balanced, rich, spicy, sweet, fruit on toast. Excellent tasting notes, folks.
Yeah.
And this is £70 at the whiskey shop, and obviously at the end of the tasting, for those of you, I should have mentioned at the start, maybe I did, I'm losing my mind tonight, but you get 15% off for joining the tasting. So yeah, if you enjoy this one, you get 15% off that 70 quid at the end. Anything interesting jumping out with those tasting notes there, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, it's the best thing about doing these whiskey tastings, right, is that the range and breadth of people who join, and all of our palates are completely different, from mine to yours to anyone sitting on here. So it's great to see, one, the amount of engagement to start with. I'm loving the, where are we? Nose is light. It's great, interesting, not picking much of, and just here. Some like drinks like a nice white wine with some freshly baked bread. This for me is kind of like that pre-dinner, that aperitif. You're sitting, and instead of having that wine or that spritz or something like that, you're sitting with this and the freshly baked bread that comes down, and that sort of lather of butter that comes on it too, which gives it that sort of rich, luscious mouthfeel. That sort of dryness, I really love that from Steph. And then water adds a clear mouthfeel. It does. I feel with this one, the water really complements the whiskey as well. I mean, just like it all does, there's no right or wrong way to drink whiskey. The only correct way to drink it is whatever way you like it, which is the most important part. For me, I would certainly try it from the bottle as the blender or distiller or producer bottled it at, so you could see their intention versus what you want to do with it afterwards. A summer evening dram, absolutely. This is that light sort of stepping stone into the rest of what we're going to taste tonight. And then even if your evening doesn't finish after this whiskey tasting, then absolutely it's a midsummer night's dram as a personal favorite. And what is it you think of this for the people who have had it and haven't had it? Is this something you would come back to? Is it something that you still have a bottle of, or is something that you would recommend, or you would consider getting a bottle of afterwards as well? This for me is just for friends who do and don't. It's just an all-rounder. It's a real winner for me. Plus, I'm a massive sherry fan as well, like most other people, I would imagine.
I think sadly what happens with a lot of these, for people, now I'm not actually speaking in general, but for my whiskey drinking friends, is that a lot of these Diageo, like the Glenkinchie, I think gets overlooked a lot. Massively. A lot of the kind of hardcore whiskey drinkers, and if you're in bars and you see it, I probably wouldn't be my go-to. And that, for a long time, that was the case with the one we're going to try today, the Clynelish 14. I didn't really think much about it until like a couple of years ago. Now I love it. I think it's one of my favorite whiskies, and Glenkinchie is a bit like that. I really enjoying this dram, and I'm kind of thinking, why don't I go for it more often as an evening dram, either at home or if you see it in the pub. The wine notes people are talking about, personally, after adding the water, they come through way more. It's almost like a butteriness, like a Austrian Riesling or something, I'm really feeling pretentious tonight. Sorry.
I can tell, and I absolutely love it. The best thing, again, as I said, the best thing about these tastings is that I also learn. So I can say X, Y, and Z and impart all these different types of things, but I also learn a lot about these from whenever people give me tasting notes, or even just the way that they approach it. That sort of reigniting a spark in someone with a whiskey that they may have had 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and showcasing something also a little bit new as well. For me, it's super exciting. And with Glenkinchie, it's only about 15, I think it's like 15 miles outside of Edinburgh as well. So if you're from there, you want a day trip, it's amazing, because you can do Glenkinchie in the morning, and then you get a bus or a taxi back, and then do Princess Street as well, because it drops you off by the train station and by that hotel that's there as well. So you can just do Princess Street straight afterwards. I did that on my second week. I went up and did Princess Street and Glenkinchie, and it's such an amazing tour, and it's such a great drive out there as well, because it takes you out of that city feel and brings you into this whole nature. It's superb. I really love the setting that it's in, and just again being there and seeing the vastness of the distillery, of the operation, and all the people who are involved from start to finish is spectacular. Anyway, that's me talking more about my experience again.
That's interesting. That's a really good point, though, Adam, because we haven't mentioned it yet, and I'm not sure if you're aware, because I didn't say it before we came on, but the W Club members get 20% off. I think it's 20 or 15. I think it's 20. I'm pretty sure. Visits to Diageo brand homes. So I'm pretty sure Glenkinchie is included. If not, with the Johnnie Walker Princess Street, definitely is. So if you log into your W Club members hub and go to partner offers, you'll have to sign up, Adam. For everyone else on here who's a W Club member, you get the 20% off. So if you are up doing that trip that Adam says, and you want to do Glenkinchie and a couple of distilleries in the same day, definitely think about booking through your W Club membership, and you take advantage of that discount. So there you go. Sorry.
I mean, it's such an amazing trip to do anyway, but the fact that you get a discount on it as well is even more enticing. Oh my. So to step on to, we're going to move up from the lowlands, from that sort of grassy, lush Greenland, and move into Cardew, even more forest, even more national park, even more beautiful scenery.
Unofficially Cardew, because it's Benrinnes, but yeah.
Unofficially Cardew. I'm moving to Benrinnes. I keep saying Cardew because I actually have it in my Cardew dram glass as well, even though I've got the bottle in front of me. So I have the Benrinnes bottle, and this is where the first of the questions come in. You're probably not going to be able to see it amazing on my screen, but this is where Google can be your best friend. So the first two of the questions is who dubbed this range flora and fauna, and what is the animal on the front of the Benrinnes label? And whilst everyone's sort of typing quickly into Google, unless you already know, which would be even more amazing. I should get an honorary membership. I hope I'll get. I mean, as long as Luke wants to give me an honorary membership, I'll get an honorary membership.
Well, I was just saying in the chat there, so let's get ahead of ourselves. Like, if you keep this up, you've been good so far, so keep going. And we've already, Jeff Adams has said Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson, the singer, or Michael? Yeah, absolutely. It was Michael Jackson. So Michael Jackson was and is a whiskey writer. And initially, whenever Diageo launched the Flora and Fauna range, a grouse, absolutely. Ryan, you got the grouse. Ryan was in first on my screen, so yeah, it was a grouse. So the Flora and Fauna range was launched in the 1990s, whenever Diageo was known as United Distillers. And this range showcases some of Diageo's lesser known distilleries. So things that we don't place as much emphasis on, that are still massive cogs in the Diageo machine. Whilst I'm talking about this range, feel free to have a nose and a taste of the Benrinnes as well. And let me know what you think in the chat. Nose and then taste the notes, and then finish as well. So these whiskies are normally launched as independent bottlings through the Flora and Fauna range, or massively put into blends. So originally nameless, it was dubbed Flora and Fauna by whiskey author Michael Jackson as a nod to the drawings of the animals and the plants on the labels that surround. So each bottle of the Flora and Fauna range have a similar looking label, but the drawings are actually exactly this, or the drawings are very different. So the drawings represent the flowers, the greenery, the shrubbery, and the animals that live around the distillery, which I think is an amazing nod to that area, that distillery, and the whole surrounding and the history and the story of these bottles, these distilleries that make up the entire Diageo range. Coffee and caramel on the nose, caramel, a chewy, long finish. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's gone very dark where you're at, all of a sudden. But...
Oh wow, let me turn this light on.
Yeah, there are some great taste notes already coming in. As you mentioned, caramel, vanilla, chewy, long finish, toffee caramel, really light and buttery on the nose. The color difference is quite stark. Are these natural colorings on these ones or not?
So the Benrinnes is actually 100% sherry. So it's 100% sherry cask, which is why it has this massive dark color. It's one of our few bottles that have 100% sherry finish. It's also the only distillery in our range that has Ben in its name, so it indicates that there's a massive mountain nearby, which would be Benrinnes, of course. And a really fun fact about this is that up until a few years ago, it used to be this sort of 2.5 times or 2.4 times distilled. My assumption, I haven't been to Benrinnes, was this was to add fruit, like a fruit character, I guess, or this, and it also uses worm tubes like Mortlach as well. But I don't think there's any identifiable differences between a 2.4 for this whiskey in particular, because the sherry really strips away a lot of that, or really adds, it sort of adds and counterbalances those flavor notes. So it's now going to 3 times distilled, which is again very interesting because it's normally done in the lowlands rather than in Speyside. But this is one of those distilleries that's the vital cog in a whole Diageo machine. And the producer of this whiskey it does mirror something like Mortlach, where it has that sort of meatiness, that chewiness that someone mentioned beforehand. David, the caramel with that sort of chewy long finish. It has that sort of where you don't fight through it, but it has that sort of sticky mouthfeel as well, which I think is delicious. But Benrinnes has gone through quite a lot of sort of ownership, and like, you know, initially it was built in 1826, and then it was destroyed by a flood a few years later, and then it was rebuilt at sort of by the foothills of Benrinnes, and then it changed hands, and then went back, and then it was it's one of those distilleries with a vast history, and then came back to DCL, so essentially Diageo in 1925. I think this distillery is, for me, is really undersung. So Benrinnes was one of this and Clynelish actually were two of the first whiskies that got me into whiskey in general, where I saw the Benrinnes label. I was like, I have no idea what that means. So I asked the bartender at the time to bring back the bottle. And it was just the sort of really, I want to say simple labeling, sort of the simple design that really caught me. And I was like, well, why is this different to this label, and why have they got a whole collection? And the guy couldn't tell me, so I decided to look up for myself. And my whole curiosity, I fell down a rabbit hole, and decided to really look into it. And it was, I think, I didn't understand what sort of, at that point, and it was several years ago, what sherry finishes were or what any of this was. And now here we are, where I'm talking about sherry finishes, when realistically I was, you know, I was a complete novice up until about 7 or 8 years ago. I'm really showcasing my age here, aren't I?
No, not at all.
So, and I, as mentioned before, so Benrinnes is one of the few distilleries that still uses worm tube condensation as well, where they run the vapor through very, very cold water in these massive worm tubes. I actually got to see a couple of distilleries whenever, where do we go? Linkwood, and then not that it doesn't use worm tube distillate or worm tube condensation, but I'm trying to think where we went afterwards. It was closed at the time. Anyway, I got to see inside these well, we did go to Mortlach, and we got to see like inside.
Worm tube. There's one at Diageo Brandhome up the A9 on the left, and I can't remember.
My mind is completely blanking as well. But we did get to go to Mortlach, and I got to see sort of inside. And I don't know.
Dalwhinnie has a worm tub as well, doesn't it?
I think so. I believe so. I don't know if anyone actually. I don't know if anyone's actually been to Mortlach here. Has anyone been to Mortlach before? If not, it's madness. It looks like it's been pulled together by people who had no idea what they're doing. I don't know how that distillery operates, but it's amazing whenever it does. And it looks so out of place, but everything really, really does come together. Anyway, that's me going off on a tangent yet again. But I've seen some amazing taste notes come through, and for me, again, I love this one as well, where especially with as you mentioned, the color beforehand, if you get to hold it up and even compare it to the whiskey before, you can see that really dark, beautiful colors. Got like this rosewood color, which is just unbelievable. On the nose, for me, plum. It's sort of plum. Green.
Well, we've got some fantastic taste notes coming in here, where Craig is the ideal start drink for non-whiskey drinkers. No slightly phalenic, sweet toffee-ish. For me, this always reminds me of maple pecan Danish, buttery, sweet pastry, sweet, chewy Moorish. It's a great tasting note, James. This is one of my favorites. Old car leather on the nose, rich, sweet mouthful, very edible. I get malty and a bit of sulfur, says Stephen. I had a few bottles of the Benrinnes. It's a go-to whiskey. So it's quite popular in the chat.
Yeah,
there. Flowers in the nose, cinnamon, honey, waxy. Lemon on the palate. Yeah, and it's 53 pounds, so incredible value as well.
It's such a winner. Like, for me, it's a real winner, and I feel like, please don't quote me on this because I might get in trouble, but I feel like this might be one of the whiskeys that we probably start putting more money into and really start investing more in, because I feel like it has that following, it has that understanding. And I mean, it's more. I mean, for me, it's more of a hope than anything else. But I have heard people talk about it, where this should be something that we invest more in. It becomes one of our core brands. So for me, on the nose, it gets this sort of meaty and savory note as well, where it has to fight through those big sort of dense sherry, red fruits, like ripe dates rather than dried out dates. and almost like a demerara sugar note as well, a sort of brown, savory sugar. With time, that oak comes through, and you understand that there's that wood that's definitely happening. And then, pardon me, something like someone said sort of leather, sort of car leather before. I think like car leather and almost like a leather tobacco pouch as well, like very small, very subtle leather tobacco pouch, and then becomes sort of hits with that sort of rich, dense sherry, red fruit, almost like a fun Christmas cake. Like all Christmas cakes are fun, but with small meaty undertones that come through as well.
Ourselves, Adam. Not all Christmas cakes are fun.
Not all Christmas cakes are fun, especially if you set them on fire and someone hurts themselves. It's almost, for me, it's like raspberry jam if you're cooking like a steak as well. It has that sort of that smell, but that taste where it's almost salivating to a point, and it almost has again this sort of dried cigar leaf tobacco taste as well. It has, for me, it's such an amazing blend. It just showcases that marriage of sherry and sort of meat, like heavy meat whiskey that come together, that really complement each other. And it has a really beautiful finish as well. Really voluminous, really sort of lush and full and complex, but not complicated, which I really like.
Mm-hmm.
And as Chris said, it is a great price, but it's not available online.
I just saw there that it is out. It was in stock earlier on today, so I'm sure we'll be able to correct that before the recording goes out tomorrow. So apologies for that. Obviously, with for UK based customers, with the recent announcement that you've TWS Unlimited, so free shipping, so there's no need to build a basket anymore. So if you're waiting, don't just crack on and get another bottle, and I'll make sure that we either have it back in stock tomorrow or have an ETA and when it will be. There was a question there from Jamie about what's the advantage of using worm tubs. Do you want to maybe go into that as to why they kind of help with the production?
Yeah, we can do, absolutely. So I wouldn't say that there's, I guess, and what's the advantage is probably not the right way to look at it. Where what worm tubs can do is provide a very different character, very different flavor to what other whiskey might be or is being produced. So it's also a much older way of cooling, condensing whiskey in a much quicker fashion. But it, as said prior, so whiskey comes from the same three base ingredients, and it's what distilleries, what producers, distillers, and distilleries do to the whiskey in terms of things like fermentation time, time of maturation cask, how it's condensed, how quickly, how much reflux, all these it gets really more scientific towards the end of it as well. And during the whole process, where it is just science the whole way through. I mean, not just science, but I guess science and magic, of course, whenever you produce whiskey. But what it does is I don't know if anyone's tried Mortlach before. I know I keep bringing that up, but it's the most sort of reminiscent thing, especially understanding the whole process and being there. But it gives it this sort of oily, fatty meat. The best way to describe it is this meat character, almost like a savoriness, that whenever you bring the temperature down really fast or through really cold water, it just gives it this fuller, lusher, not really a word, lusher body, where then it stores the flavor and makes that finish really, really long as well. So saying it has advantages is one way to put it, but it's more what distillery characteristics can you impart in the bottle or in the whiskey itself.
Yeah, I must say, Lusher was my favorite R&B artist of the early 2000s. Alistair says, do Benrinnes
the wrong industry, honestly.
Sorry?
I think you're in the wrong industry. You may as well do stand-up instead.
Alistair says, do Benrinnes do a tour, a nice area to do a distillery crawl. Distillery centre there?
I haven't been to Benrinnes myself. I'm sure if there was enough attention or enough interest, this is something we could most certainly organize, because a lot of the whiskey that's produced from Benrinnes is mostly put into blends, which is really unfortunate because it is such a delicious liquid. But I'm sure if I had to go and do it as well, I'm sure it's certainly something we could organize. So if you let me look into it, I'll certainly get back to you for doing a distillery crawl. Perhaps a variety of distillery tours in case anyone from Diageo hears this. I know we're off the clock, but just in case.
Well, you have the Dramathon. You know, I don't know if you've heard of that, Adam, where people go up to Speyside and they run. You can do a marathon, a half marathon, or 10K, and you get a mini from each distillery you pass along the way, and you can. Obviously, I don't think they advise you. I think people do drink them on the go. I don't think they advise you to drink them on the go, but if you finish with a bunch of these minis and then you drink them all.
And then you drink them all at the end.
Yeah, no, it's really popular. People do it for charity. I was thinking of doing it at some point. It's a bit like the Belgium do a similar one with beer, where you run drink beer along the way.
The beer runs. Again, I guess to wrap up worm tube condensation is that the general assumption is that because there's cold water in the worm tubs, it causes the vapor to condense really rapidly, and so there isn't as much copper contact. So generally makes a heavier, fuller style of spirit. But with all things whiskey, it's only one part to the whole process, right? So there's things that happen beforehand, whatever, even down to things like the style of malt that you use. All these things factor into the style of spirit that gets made. So there's a whole bunch of different factors that influence the style of spirit that comes out at the end.
Yeah, it's all about managing reflux, I suppose, which so much of whiskey distillation is. Scott said, "Hi, I ran the Dramathon 10K last year. Nice wee 3 freebies after 2. Brilliant. Would you recommend it, Scott? I suppose that's the big question. Will we come on to the Clynelish?
Yes, of course. I know we spent a lot of time there as well, but it's just there's just a lot to cover.
I think we're going along at a good pace.
Yeah, great.
Let us know in the chat if you think we're not.
Yeah, if you want me to stop talking, just tell me to speed up, and I'll absolutely get behind it. What's the main reason between most are going into blends? Is there not enough production to warrant? So I guess with the fact that we're introducing it here is that it's just not as well known, and it's not the most marketable style of product or style of whiskey. So we tend to focus on things like Johnnie Walker is a massive one, and Caol, Clynelish, these types of brand homes, and the bigger styles or the bigger brands of whiskey. But it's something that, I mean, not that I'm going to have any say or any input, but I'm certainly going to try. And I want Benrinnes to be like this, and Blair Athol are my two that I want this push to be sort of the next core brands that we really start to focus on and start to materialize. But the majority of it goes into blends because of the 100% sherry influence, and we need it within different styles of blends throughout Diageo. But yeah, we'll move on to, that's a great question, and we'll move on to
the other side of this is James' question is historically that was for most of the 20th century, most single malts ended up in blends. It's kind of a relatively recent phenomenon over the last 30-40 years that we've obsessed over single malts. And obviously Johnnie Walker is the biggest selling Scotch whiskey in the world, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe one of, if not the biggest selling whiskey in the world. And blends outsell every other Scotch whiskey. The blends are the most popular style in the world, so the whiskey goes into them needs to come from somewhere, I suppose, doesn't it?
Yeah. So they're just as a point or a touch point where this whole phenomenon of single malts really comes from marketing within the past sort of anywhere from 40 to 65 years ago, where beforehand, even still in the world today, the majority of whiskey sold is blended whiskey or whiskey for blends. But if you go into a whiskey bar, the majority of the whiskey on the back bar is single malt whiskey, because it has this, it had this sort of air of superiority around it, because that's the way it was marketed. People really a lot of whiskey producers started to dislike blended whiskey because they were being completely outstripped and outsold by blends. But that's, within blended whiskey, and I'll touch on this whenever we get the Johnnie Walker Blue Label, there's nowhere for bad whiskey to hide. There's no point of making a blended whiskey if it's not better than the sum of its parts, or takes the best parts from the sum of its parts. Name and shame. I don't know if I could do that.
Well, no, as Bob was said, this would make a great competitor to several other mediocre sherry influenced whiskeys. So I was more asking him to name and shame rather than yourself. There,
Bob, I'll send you a bottle.
It's being recorded, folks.
So yeah,
we come on to the Clynelish.
Absolutely, we'll move on to Clynelish very swiftly there. So this is another question point as well. Is so you're gonna have to Google this one as well, but I have the full bottle, the bigger bottle here, and it's, why does Clynelish or the Clynelish label have a wildcat on the front of the label?
I think I know this one. It's because it's from Kilkenny.
That's exactly it. It's actually from what's that film called? High School Musical. You know, the I think their basketball team was called the
Well,
Wild.
two very different cultural references there.
So this is as we move up from, is it Gaelic for Wildcat? That's a good one. That's a good answer, but it's not it. Sutherland coat of arms. Well done, Craig. Absolutely. So the Sutherland family owned quite a lot of that. Well, essentially all of that land, and their coat of arms had a wildcat on it. So if you've ever been to the Clynelish distillery, they have, so they always, all the brand homes have the strided man statue, and then they have a little wildcat statue underneath the tree as well, which is adorable. So as I talk through this, have a smell, have a taste. Let me know what you think in the chat. And also let me know if you have or haven't had that before as well. So this is located in the Highland region, and Clynelish 14, I said before, this has a very personal influence on me, where after the Benrinnes, I tried Clynelish because it was sort of almost a similar button, but a very different style of whiskey. So he was like, try this and see what you think. And I instantly fell in love. So this distillery is built opposite Brora. So the original old Clynelish distillery was built in 1819, if I'm not mistaken, but in 1969 it changed its name to Brora, and this is so they're right beside each other, and they've swapped names a few times. So Brora actually made heavily peated whiskey in 1969 to 1973 to cover blending, because there was a drought of heavily peated whiskey coming from Islay. So the Brora distillery at the moment is closed down, and it had to close down in 1893, unfortunately, but there's rumors that it's going to reopen, and there might be visits, and there's going to be new make whiskey coming from it as well, which is amazing. And the new Clynelish distillery, which is the current Clynelish distillery, was built in 1968, and it continued making it's single malt whiskey, and two whiskey for blending as well.
Famously founded by two brothers, Aurora and Ellis.
So we've got history lessons, and we've got delicious whiskey to taste.
Yeah.
So
that's why it was called Brora. It's Aurora Brora
Aurora Borealis. Love a Highland whiskey, rich dark fruit in the nose, delicious. So this is always have a bottle of Clynelish on the bottle. Absolutely, this for me is 100% a whiskey I always have. I always have on my back bar, which is again just behind my big fat head. Cask is.
I've actually got one here as well.
One there, I can see it there. Steph, the cask is ex-bourbon, but so I actually went to this was another part of the trip. I went into the Brora distillery, and it was really strange. So whenever you drink Clynelish distillery, whenever you try Clynelish, for me, I get this. I always associate sort of waxy, buttery, sort of velvety style of flavor, like in terms of body and characteristic. And where that comes from, so whenever they actually I keep saying Brora, whenever they closed Clynelish during COVID, they had to scrub it. They had to scrub it clean. But where a lot of this sort of waxy, buttery feeling comes from is from one of the receivers, and it has this almost like a funk. It has this sort of like almost like an oily funk on it, and that's where you get a lot of this oily, buttery character as well. And they said that the spirit didn't taste the same until this sort of funk and gunk built up again. And it's completely safe because it's a high proof spirit whenever it comes into the receiver before it gets redistilled again. But that's what gives it this lush, velvety body, which I think is unbelievable. I just couldn't understand how this almost like gray material gives it this waxy buttery note, which is so iconic to Clynelish. But again, I keep saying Brora, and Brora is meant to be reopening at some point as well, which I think will be amazing whenever it does open, because I really want to go, and two, it does have this cult following that I feel like needs to be re-explored, and I'm glad that it's going to be within all of our lifetimes, because I think it's just such an unbelievable liquid, and people who have casks and bottles from beforehand will get to see new make spirit and get to experience new whiskey coming from that distillery again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very looking forward to. I mean, that's been obviously on the horizon for a long period of time. Very much looking forward to try it. I've tried a couple of old Broras. I must say they probably weren't worth what you end up paying for them. The old Gordon MacPhail bottlings, whatever. A lot of not bad whiskey, but you pay a lot of money for it.
I went to a place in Inverness. Is it the malt room, the dram room? I can't remember what it was called. I've got a receipt from it somewhere. But they had a bottle of Brewer 39, and it was like 900. The malt room. Thank you. I was close. They had a bottle of
the rum bit.
39. That was like 900, like £950 or something, and I was like, oh, I wish.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but I would stand up well on it. You're absolutely, you know what, Craig? You're absolutely right. It would stand up well on the cocktail. This makes a delicious pina colada. I won't lie to you. This makes a fantastic pina colada. This and Johnnie Walker Gold Label, which I'll actually touch on here as well. So, Clynelish plays a massive part in the heart of Johnnie Walker Gold Label. If anyone's tried Johnnie Walker Gold before, which also makes a delicious pina colada, by the way. So Johnnie Walker Gold Label, which I know we're not tasting, but just as a sort of sidestep from Clynelish 14, was introduced in 1920, and this was 100 years after the John Walker and Sons family started their official whiskey business. So the reason it's Johnnie Walker Gold Label is because the water source in the rivers around Clynelish and Brora, where they used to take the water from for their whiskey distillation and their whiskey production, and the people who lived on the land used to pan for gold, and also used to mine for gold in the hills around there as well. So that's where they get Johnnie Walker Gold Label from, because Clynelish plays such a huge part in that blend, and in that blend with whiskey and the story behind it. So it's a great sidestep. I really love talking about that. A few drops of water softens it massively. Yeah. So this is 46% ABV as well. So it has a fuller. It feels fuller than 46% as well. On the palate for sure. For me, the nose is there are apples and pear drops, and then you get this sort of waxy must.
You said waxy there, because Jamie Slee actually said a good comment, but he actually, I'm sure by mistake, sent it as a direct message to me. So I think Deanston has a similar kind of waxiness to it. So yeah, we had a Deanston tasting recently, and it was really well received, and I can totally see what he means. I never thought of it before, but definitely, yeah, I think could be right.
Absolutely. It's the whiskey that probably won me over to the entire whiskey category as a whole. It has this almost like a mustard edge as well, like heather, and then comes in like heather, slight vanilla, still get some citrus on it as well, a little bit of ginger. It's fresh, it's bright, it's open, it's pretty complex, and it's definitely Clynelish whenever you smell and taste it.
And it's £49, and it definitely is available. So you get 15% off that at once I give the code at the end, folks. So I mean, like, there's a lot of people here in the chat have said that it's the one they keep in their bar at home, and I so £49, I can definitely see why it's one to that's everyone's going to be a crowd pleaser, and it's not going to break the bank, like so yeah,
it has this, again, on the palate, has this sort of waxy creamy texture, almost like a nutty note with someone said before it's got this sort of salty and brininess to it as well. Yeah, vanilla salty grim for sure. Orange peel, slightly herbal. It almost has this I always say it has like this sort of tropical pineapple cacao note as well to it, which I think is, that's just me as well. That's in my head and my palate, where this has this sort of tropical bright freshness. And it does. I never really associated a lot of Highland whiskey with being briny or salty or having that real minerality to it. But after being at the distillery and seeing just how close you are to a beachfront, I think it really does have that brininess. And after tasting it from the cask into this bottle, it's fantastic. It's a real all rounder again, and hits very different points. But Christian just said there, palate for me is orange zest, juicy peaches, pear drops, cherries, barley, and lightly charred oak.
Yeah, and that Kevin Wright has agreed there with the briny aftertaste. I must say, as you say, Highland region there, a famously tropical part of the world, so I can definitely see that.
I mean, the palm trees just stretch for miles and miles. Like it's great.
Well, I mean, what's funny is that the Highlands and where I'm from, down in the southwest of Ireland, when it's like you get a spell of weather like we've had recently, where everything dries out, you quickly looks like Spain, like it is amazing how quickly things can change, like
it's fantastic. It really is.
the heather and that kind of mountain highland grass just kind of dries up a bit, and it just gives this appearance like you could easily be much further south. Palm trees in the west, says Philip. A more solid and complex waxy taste to it, says Andy, and getting ginger, orange, oak aftertaste. Creates a hint of saltiness, reminds me of Campbelltown. So some fantastic taste notes and really salient points there, folks. Keep them coming. Will we slowly start migrating towards the Clynelish?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're gonna take a short journey across the water to Clynelish, which is the only brand home of Johnnie Walker I haven't been to yet, and I had to sacrifice a trip to Islay, unfortunately, to someone else, because I have other commitments, which makes me really sad. But once I get I'm not sure if actually, before we slowly move on, has anyone got a preference of the three that we've tried before from the Glenkinchie distillers, Benrinnes and Clynelish? Any favorites so far?
Yeah, that's a good shout. I mean, we do often ask people to give a rundown at the end, but this is actually probably a more clever time to do it when people are still sober.
Clynelish, Benrinnes, Benrinnes, Clynelish just slightly taken over. Benrinnes. It's pretty even actually. Clynelish first. Clynelish, Benrinnes. It's fairly even between Clynelish and Benrinnes there.
Yeah, I would say Benrinnes just slightly edging it, but yeah, definitely very close. It would be
because I haven't had it in so long. It's probably calling back to me from all those years ago. But yeah, I think so far Benrinnes is just slightly over the edge, which is great. But I still have some left in my glass. I'm not sure if anyone else does or if anyone else has something to come back to afterwards. But I would definitely come back to them after we've tried all of the whiskey and then see which one which one hits different then as well. But yeah, we'll move on to Clynelish. And as Luke and I had a prior discussion before everyone else jumped in, and for me this is, it's always the way I like to talk about these types of whiskey. It's always that whiskey that you picked out of your dad or your parents' cabinet, your grandparents' cabinet whenever you were, yay big, and you drank it and you're like, yeah, whiskey. I always see people drinking whiskey. I always see my parents drinking whiskey. And then you drank it and you realize that your mouth felt like ash and you're like, I'm never drinking whiskey ever again. And then as you grew up and developed your own palate, you realize that it was actually the most delicious thing you probably could have drank. And you're just a little bit too young to really be introduced to it, right?
No, 100%. I mean, as you said, it was something you said beforehand. It's something that people on this tasting would be sick of hearing me say. But I think your relationship with peat growing up makes a huge difference. Like, as in people who understand where it comes from, that smell when you're in a pub or at home or whatever, and have a relationship with it. Just whether or not they like it when they're younger, kind of grow an appreciation for it compared to people who, especially when I've met Americans, my previous job used to meet a lot of them who just just could not fathom where the smoky flavor was coming from, and it was alien. But once you give them a bit of raw peated barley and get them to actually chew it, suddenly like something clicks in your brain. It's like, that's where the flavor comes from.
I guess even at the time, whenever you're discussing it with people, right, and you're like, beforehand they smoke peat and then they put the malt on top of it, and like that's where you get the smoke from. And even though this smoke was only imparted for could be 1 day, 2 days, could be a few hours, it still stays within the bottle for the next, if we take Clynelish 12 year, it stays within the bottle for the next, whenever it's bottled, it's 12 years, could be way more, could be, it's great. And then you try and expand, you explain this to people, and so that little bit of smoke, or a lot of smoke, stays in the whiskey for the whole time. I've asked people where peat comes from before, or that sort of peat characteristic, that smoke characteristic, and people say, it comes from bog water, it comes from different types of water, it comes from all this stuff. And then you explain and you show them smoke barley, or show them raw peat, or all those types of things, and it does, you're right, it's like a light comes on. But I know I've seen a lot of people excited to taste Clynelish, and who obviously had it before. But yeah, smell it, smell the dram, taste it, let me know what you think. And this is, because it's the one brand home I haven't been to, it's the one brand home I don't have a dram glass from. But I've asked the person who's gone on the trip for me to bring me back a dram glass, so I've got all four of them from all four corners of Scotland, which Excellent. Is the most exciting reason why I'm glad they're gone.
Brilliant. We got some great tasting notes. I mean, Andy and Reverend Kevin Wright are like Clynelish. Now we're talking Clynelish, always a gem. Anderson says the one I know I won't like, TCP on the nose. I used to get made to gargle TCP when I was a kid to when I had a sore throat. I can understand why that would
Not a Clynelish fan.
grow up not to enjoy it. Craig says not a Clynelish fan. Jeff says my car broke down the road to Clynelish. I did manage to fix it and get to the tour on time. It's like your first dram at a beach party, just as the fire is getting going and the sun goes down. Clynelish 12 was my getaway whiskey at uni. Definitely one that made me discover what whiskey had flavor beyond the burn. Bob said peppermint and lemon, faint grassiness. They're excellent tasting notes. When you get past the smoke, they're definitely there. Yeah.
There's no smuggy peat. It's evocative of Crofter's Cottage. Oh wow. Okay.
That's another great tasting note. Yeah. Clynelish, where have you been all my life? Recently found a distillery, subtle peat smoke, lovely creamy butterness, taste and texture, mouthfeel, long smoky finish. Yeah, brilliant.
It's not bad. You're right. Yeah, it's these types of whiskey where you sort of have to hold it as well, and you want to fight the temptation, sort of just fight past that sort of that smoke, that burn, that smoke, that peat characteristic, and just even if you drink it and hold it on your palate for about sort of anywhere from sort of 9 to 12 seconds, just let it sit and just let it mix with your saliva, and then swallow, and like you really appreciate all the minute flavors rather than just sort of that peat dominance. But as Stephen said there, it's a nicely soft or softly peated dram, so it's not as intense as some other peated drams can be. But I guess the actual distillery as well is a staple powerhouse of Islay Scotch, and as far as I'm aware, it's the largest producer of whiskey on Islay as well. The whiskey that isn't placed into Clynelish again into the single malts goes into blends, which is very, very important. It's actually extremely important for the Johnnie Walker range in its entirety, not just Blue Label, but whenever you start a black label and work your way up, where you get that classical sort of wisp of smoke. That's a lot of that comes from Clynelish. And it just adds that sort of beautiful balance of peat and that wisp of smoke and that complexity where it really needs to be, where, you know, even if it's a small percentage that goes into the blends, it just uplifts it so much. And the importance of blended Scotch in its entirety is still indeed one of the main reasons for the modern day success of Clynelish as well, which I think is unbelievable. I think it's only about, as far as I remember from overhearing from someone, it's only about 5% of Clynelish is actually used for single malts, and the rest of it goes into blends, which is such a weird number whenever you think about it. Only 5% makes it into bottles, and the rest goes into blends. You see the difference in the percentage of individual bottlings that are released versus all that goes into blended whiskey, which is it's still weird for me to try and fathom the actual numbers. But we get there. Visited Clynelish many times, had a number of holidays there, and Clynelish was definitely a visit each time. Amazing.
Bob, so, how much to independents? How many get sold on to third parties?
So in terms of I actually don't know how much goes into third parties. I know Clynelish definitely sell casks. They sell individual casks to the sort of collectors and buyers as well, where they can bottle it themselves or do age statements and stuff like that, or their own age statements and stuff like that, which is really interesting. So I know there's something coming in about that, where I definitely know that in terms of percentages or how much or how little, I don't have a definitive number, but they're certainly ones to give access to their whiskey, which I think is amazing, because it shouldn't just be kept for, you know, blends or single malts. It should be shared. The whole point of whiskey is to be shared and consumed, right? The wildlife, all that sort of stuff. So compared to the Glenkinchie, and you get bubblegum candy flossing. Oh,
interesting. That's very interesting. And James said that this peated Clynelish, I think, is one of the most comfortable and great introductory to Islay whiskies, on the same par as Lager 16, subtle but smoky. Definitely, I think for me, I think a good Kilcoman is a good way to introduce someone. But this would definitely be up there as well. 100%.
I was definitely a Kilcoman fan for sure. For a long time, it helped me sidestep into sort of that sort of Islay characteristic, that those sort of smoke peated quality whiskies. But Kilcoman was definitely a stepping stone for me. But Clynelish, because there was Clynelish peated and unpeated for a long time as well, where I feel like maybe I just got the more heavily peated version of Clynelish, and I was like, oh god. Even also used in Johnnie Walker Green Label, correct? A personal favorite of mine too, where there's a lot of Speyside whiskey goes in there, but there's Green Label and then there's Green Highland, which use a lot more West Coast whiskey. So Johnnie Walker Green Highland is the travel retail exclusive. So from airports, for example, where they'll use a lot more West Coast sort of Islay style whiskies that go in there.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Meta says, as an ex-smoker of 5 years, this might be a factor to my liking of most Islay whiskey, like having a fine cigar taste.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go. Well, I will actually disagree with that, Mel, because as also as an ex-smoker, sometimes when you go back to cigarettes, you actually wonder, like, oh, this tastes terrible. I wonder what I ever liked about this. Whereas I still love peated whiskies, so they've never gone off them. Philippa says, I love the gentle smoke of Clynelish. So it's getting some great responses, and it's only £46, folks. And that's before you're 15% off, so it's incredible value.
Clynelish much more powerful.
All the drams are so far. And this isn't it because it's I'm sure it's going to be stunning when we try it, but our next one is going to be a jump up from those price points.
For sure. I guess for my sort of nose palate of Clynelish is I think something that's not associated typically with Islay styles of whiskey is fresh. And for me, Clynelish it has peatiness on the nose for sure and smoke, but it has a freshness too. Almost like it has these sort of salty vegetables. It's like salty green vegetables too, a little bit of seaweed. Almost like someone said before, there's that sort of bonfire smoke, or you're on the beach by a barbecue. One thing I really get from this is like melon skin, like sort of that fresh melon juice as well, where I pull out some green nuts, white grape, celery is another big one. I think the nose in Clynelish is absolutely amazing. And it builds and builds and builds every time you go back to it too. So I would definitely see if someone come back to it afterwards.
Yeah, the more you sit with it, the kind of the vegetable notes definitely come through a lot more. And we've got a comment there saying they understand Alistair's comment read TCP, but to me that refers to Lefroy and some more perfumey Islay whiskies. Clynelish is much more palatable in my top 3 distilleries on a normal day. Excellent. Well, I hope today's a normal day.
I hope today's a normal day as well. Yeah. The palate for me is it can be quite challenging, especially up and had it before, or if you're coming back to it after a long time. And it's a real flavor. It's a real like big flavor bomb for me. Starts with peat and it just dances the whole way to the end of your palate, which I think is great. It's oily. It has this, again, a freshness carries through as well. Even though it has this sort of oily character, this peat character, it's still fresh and bright. The texture that reaches really sits in all parts of your palate for sure, without being overbearing. So it doesn't fight for territory on your palate. Just covers everything, and it has this sort of like this sort of citric smoky finish as well, which really sits with the rest of the sort of the peat and the vegetal note and the brightness too. I think it just has an amazing balance, like overall, personally.
I totally get what you mean, and Jerry's asked, why was Clynelish chosen as one of the 4 corners rather than Lagavulin?
It's a great question. So I think it's actually David probably answered underneath. It's very light in comparison to Lagavulin, and it was also likely one of the whiskies that was more accessible at the time whenever Johnnie Walker was first being blended too. So you have to think that way back whenever Johnnie Walker or the John Walker and Sons Company was first blending whiskey, they only had access to certain distilleries. So Clynelish likely at the time was one of the first distilleries from Ireland that they had access to for that type of whiskey. And it's much lighter than something like Lagavulin and much easier to control in terms of blending, balancing, and the overall concept of I guess flavor manipulation as we go along, where Lagavulin's a lot brinier, a lot saltier, probably a lot more abrasive in terms of actually having to mix and blend with. But also Clynelish produces a lot more whiskey as well. But yeah, we'll move. What does everyone think of Clynelish? Is this something that exists on your back bar if you have it already? Is this something that lives in your house or is going to live in your house as we move along?
Yeah, no, do let us know. And I think this because that last comment from Jerry and David is the perfect kind of segue, I suppose, into, because we were asking why it doesn't make up
correct.
kind of the four corners. Because I suppose the next one we are coming on to is the Piece de la Resistance, here in Johnnie Walker Blue Label.
So it is actually, I've got 10 already. I think 12. I think 10 needs to join. Absolutely. We'll live very soon. I've always had a bottle of Clynelish, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and the 25. The 25 is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Has everyone tried Johnnie Walker? I know I asked this beforehand, but it's way back at the top. Has everyone tried Johnnie Walker Blue Label beforehand, or is this some people's first time? Has anyone got bottles of it already? Yep. David, amazing. Yes. Yep. It's a lot of yeses coming through. Amazing. Now, before we even jump into it, what does everyone think of Johnnie Walker Blue Label or blended whiskey in it as a category, so I can try and win you all over? I'd love to go to Islay.
There's some great, yeah. I mean, it's interesting the kind of, yeah. I suppose Blue Label, because I suppose everyone, your question was specific to Blue Label, but obviously I presume most people would have tried a Johnnie Walker.
Yeah.
It's something that I've always admired about the marketing of the brand, the idea that you have these kind of colored scales that you move up and jump a price point. It makes it a very aspirational whiskey, with Johnnie Walker Blue Label obviously being up at the top. It's amazing how so many other blends like the kind of more standard black label or whatever would just get kind of associated with that style and that price point, whereas you're able to have a brand that encompasses that but also has Blue Label, which everyone immediately thinks premium,
Yeah.
So it's really clever the way Johnnie Walker's brand have been able to do that. I suppose that's my 2 cents in it while people get their comments in there.
Oh, good. It's great night. So some people never tried it before. Love Johnnie Walker Black, first time Blue Label, start on blends, hold their own against single malts. Yes, not my favorite blends. Green and gold prefer to this, of course. Johnnie Walker Green Label is a favorite of mine as well. I can't lie to you. It was spectacular the first time I tried it. What is Johnnie Walker Blonde? Fantastic question. So Johnnie Walker Blonde was a release that was designed specifically for mixing, and it was designed to be a much richer, a much less complex, a much more approachable, and I hate using this word whenever it comes to whiskey, but a much sweeter style of whiskey, where it was designed to target non-whiskey drinkers, to bring them into the whiskey category. So designed to be mixed with things like Johnnie Walker Blonde and lemonade, Johnnie Walker Blonde and soda water, Johnnie Walker Blonde and ginger ale, which you can use with things like red and black as well. But Blonde was designed to be much more concise and marketed directly towards non-whiskey drinkers, generally of a younger demographic as well. I've had it once by itself and once mixed. I get the angle of where it came from. I think it definitely works in terms of attracting people towards the whiskey category in general, but particularly towards the blended whiskey category too. I've tasted Ghost and Blue. A lot of variation on Blue Label, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, David says Blue Label is good, but the Legendary is even better. We actually had that, and maybe this is where David might have tried it. We had that on a tasting last year, and it was a tremendous dram. I
actually just got a bottle of Legendary today. It's not on the back, it's in. And then whenever I visited, where do we go? I think I was at Cardew actually. I got this, which has got some Legendary in it as well. It was the first time I tried it, but I got a bottle of Legendary today just so I can have it with the rest of the collection. The Ghost is me. You're right. I'll talk about the Ghost and Rare series after we do the Blue Label tasting. But yeah, as you said, sort of as you go up in sort of label and you go up in premiumization, so sort of red, black, green, gold, blue, and then post that. But I mean, Johnnie Walker Blue Label introduced in 1992 by Dr. Jim Beveridge, which is hilarious. As our old master blender, his name was Jim Beveridge. You work in whiskey and your name's Beveridge, right? It's just, some people are just designed, they're just born into roles. Our new master blender, if anyone doesn't know, is Dr. Emma Walker, and she swears that she has no relation to the Walker family. I don't know how much of that I believe, but I'm going to say that that's what she says to me, so I'm going to believe her.
She's actually of the crisp Walkers,
So this, I'd say for me, I mean, this is the crown jewel of the Johnnie Walker core range. So red, black, green, gold, and then blue. And I think with Blue Label for me specifically, it really encompasses the three things that I really love about Johnnie Walker as a whiskey and as a brand, where it's fun. Whiskey is designed to be fun and designed to be delicious. And that's the reason that Jim actually created this whiskey. He designed it, and please, whilst I'm talking and rambling on, have a smell, have a taste, throw in some tasting notes into the chat as well. I can't wait to hear these ones. He designed the whiskey to be delicious. He also designed it to be fun and accessible. The second reason is the whiskey, the whole Johnnie Walker range, it can and is designed to be mixed in any way that you'd like it as well. So our signature serve for Johnnie Walker Blue Label is neat, and then with ice cold water or ice. A personal favorite signature serve of mine is taking it from the freezer and pouring it over vanilla ice cream, which I think is absolutely sensational. That's again a personal favorite. Yeah, it's really bougie dessert. And then a third reason I love Johnnie Walker is the constant eye on development and innovation and creativity. So things like people have already said they've managed, or they've tried, or maybe this water is going down the wrong way. They've tried the Ghost and Rare, they've tried the Legendary 8. So there are so many iterations of Blue Label, but these are all innovations, creativity, and redesigns of a really amazing liquid. For me, a blended, as mentioned before, a blended whiskey. I know there's some questions here, and I will get them, I promise you. A blended whiskey, I've said this before, but it has to be greater than the sum of its parts. Otherwise, what's the point of creating it, right? So what's the point of putting a whiskey together from a range of different distilleries if it's not going to be superior in a way to the parts that you put into it? So with Blue Label, what you get is so many depths. So it's a depth of rarity. So it's only 1 in every 10,000 casks are selected to be from our reserves of over sort of 10.5 to 11 million casks that are deemed good enough quality to go into Johnnie Walker Blue. It's the depth of complexity. So for me, Johnnie Walker Blue Label it's complex. I said this before, but this is complex, but it's approachable, and it's not overly complicated, which is what you want from a luxury whiskey. You don't want something to be so complicated that people don't understand it, and so they're afraid to approach it. And this is what Johnnie Walker Blue Label does really well. It doesn't scare people away. It keeps people engaged by being just a delicious dram overall. The depth of heritage is for me. If John Walker was alive today, he wouldn't look very good because he'd be very, very old. But if he was alive today, this for me is what he would have wanted his whiskey, whenever he first blended whiskey, to taste like every single time. This is the culmination of over 200 years blending experience, flavor experience, knowledge, and access to amazing liquid that have come together to really have this sort of pinnacle moment of Johnnie Walker Blue. And the depth of flavor, definitely keep this one, a little bit of this one, and then go back to some of the others, and then come back to this. And then you'll be able to pull out some of the flavors that come from the Benrinnes, the Clynelish, Caol, that really play factor in this whiskey as well. But I know some people I don't know if anyone's mentioned price, but I know this is,
yeah.
As to why this is more expensive, or why this sits at a much higher price point. For me, this is a truly unique whiskey from our rare and old archives throughout the Diageo. There's whiskey in here from places like Cambus, Cartsbridge, Port Ellen, Port Dundas, places that are no longer even open or have been repurposed as like a maturation warehouse or cask cooperage or any of these types of things. So every time you open or drink Johnnie Walker Blue Label, you're drinking liquid history, which I feel like is mind-blowing that some of these whiskeys aren't even being made anymore. And really what you're really experiencing this sort of this 200-year brand, 200-year tradition that's been constantly innovated and developed to make this absolutely spectacular liquid that gets bottled for us to enjoy. But I'll stop talking so you can jump in.
No, yeah, you're dead right. I was just looking at the price with the discount, because you mentioned price there. So it's 175 obviously on the website. It's 148.75 when you add the discount. So it's a good chunky 26-25 off. So that's incredible value. That's the price of your tasting pack plus some. We got some interesting comments coming in there.
Jump in.
We got Chris that says, sorry.
I was just, I have to scroll back up because I think I missed some of them as well.
Chris said it's nice, but the gold gives it a run for its money. David says you have to work to find the notes on the nose, but it's very easy on the palate. Reverend Kimber White says I can appreciate the skill of the blenders equals Johnnie Walker Blue Label, but can't justify the price. The problem with Blue Label is that you want another one. It's so drinkable. So that's Jeff's fan. David
It
says,
is really, it's a really bad thing. That.
A very taste the more of it, as they say. Hate to use the word smooth, but it's very non-offensive and would appeal to non-whiskey drinkers. But we have to. But when you've tried the single malts, don't find this very interesting. That's an interesting take. I mean, I think it's great. I mean, Andy says plenty of sweet candy floss, freshly cut grass, palate is coconut, peat fruity, pear taste. I think what lets it down, and I think it's a tremendous whiskey, is I think the drop in ABV, Adam, you know, because we've come to 40 from being, well, we 43, 46, and then 43. And you do notice that, which is why I think a couple of people had said that after tasting those ones, it didn't quite compare. But I mean, I think this is gorgeous, and it's incredibly complex. It's much more kind of crystallized sugars than you get in some of the other ones we've tasted so far. Mela said, is the 1992 the same as 2022? I don't know what that's a reference to, but I'm hoping you'll know, Adam.
So yeah, so so actually, whenever Johnnie Walker Blue Label was first released in 1992/93, it was actually called Johnnie Walker Blue Label the Oldest, and the whiskey that was in there was different. So there was whiskey from things like Port Dundas, Rora, some much. So there's always been rumors that there's been whiskey up to sort of 65 years old in Johnnie Walker Blue Label. And I'm sure in 1992 to sort of 1997, that was probably true. If you get a bottle of 1992, which I'm currently bidding on right now, I don't think I'll win it because it's going to be very expensive. I would imagine it would be quite different to. I haven't tried any Johnnie Walker Blue Label from 1992 or to 1997 before, unfortunately, but I would imagine it would be fairly different than what you're trying right now. As whiskey, you know, I guess if you look at blended whiskey or reserves that go into blended whiskey, the same as you look at sort of terroir and wine or vintages and wine, there are, no matter how consistent you are, that you're using natural ingredients, and natural raw material will vary from time to time as well. So the whiskey that you get, the point of the blended whiskey is to make it as consistent as possible. However, it's not always going to be, especially whenever you go back, 20 years, I would imagine it would be quite different. I'd say quite different. It would definitely be different. I don't know how different it would be, but if I ever get my hands on an old original bottle and I get to try it, I would say I'll share it, but I probably won't, to be honest.
You will report back though.
I will definitely report back, and I'll let everyone know.
Because that kind of ties in with the question James asked there. I might be wrong, and tell me if I heard somewhere in the past that the majority of liquid in Blue Label is over 20 years old. So confirm or deny that?
Again, this is a question I get a lot at tastings and at trainings that I do with on trade venues, where as soon as I become part of the blending team, I will let you know. But I asked whenever I was in the science and the innovations lab, and they said that they would never let me leave if they told me. And I was like, sure, I'll stay here. It's fine. I have no issue with that. But I would imagine a lot of the whiskey that is in it is likely much significantly older than the rest of the portfolio or the rest of the core range. Now, in order to balance that out, you'll need younger, fresher, brighter whiskey as well. So not all of the whiskey would be older, but I would imagine a larger proportion of the blend definitely has much older reserves, because if you look at things like if you are putting Carsbridge into it or Port Dundas into it or Port Allen into it, a lot of that whiskey is significantly older than the whiskey that's being produced today. So there is going to be rare and ghost and rare distilleries that go in, and blends and whiskey that from our reserves that go into it, but I can't say for sure if the majority is over 20 years old. I don't want to say yes because I don't want to lie to you.
Yeah. Kira's kind of said, when picking one of 1,000, are they chosen as the most exceptional of each single malt component, or only once blended you're getting Blue Label signature taste? I hope I'm not misinterpreting that, Kira, but I suppose he means in terms of choosing what whiskies go into the blend, and is the goal consistency, or is it just to get the best whiskies into the bottle? I suppose what's the kind of process?
Yeah, for sure. So whenever I was at Main Street Canvas and was being shown the tour of like how they blend and where they blend, and how they pick casks as well. So they being on Menstrie and Canvas, they have these massive warehouses. Now I can't emphasize enough the size of these warehouses. So I remember we got to walk through one, and there's 60 to 70,000 casks of whiskey in every one of these warehouses, and I think there's like something close to sort of 80 of these warehouses on this one site, which I think is unbelievable. So in terms of picking whiskey that goes into Blue Label or goes into these specific blends, it's finding whiskey that has the correct nose, the correct flavor. So it's picking whiskey from the year that so normally I would imagine they have like a little black book of recipes that in terms of getting, the right quantity of smoke, or the right quantity of sort of dark chocolate, or the right quantity of hazelnut or rose, or any of these types of flavor, like the sort of floral, smoke, minerality sort of characteristics. So they know what whiskeys give that off, and it's finding the barrels from that particular year that they would imagine will give those characteristics into the whole blend of the finished product. And I mean, there's a rumor that Dr. Emma Walker's nose is insured for £1 million. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I didn't feel right asking her if that was the case. But there's certainly a rumor that her nose is insured for a lot of money. I'd imagine that a lot of our master blenders probably, or a lot of our blending team, senior blending team sit in that category as well. But the job and the knowledge of the blender and the blending team cannot be understated either. A lot of the people on this team have doctorates in biochemical engineering. So they understand how flavor and how flavor manipulation, how chemical manipulation can alter flavor at the very end of a process. So if anyone's going to blend your whiskey, I would trust and leave it to these guys for sure.
You mentioned the insuring of the nose there. I suppose is it a bit like footballers, when they in their contracts they're told they're not allowed to go skiing or whatever, Yes, is she not allowed, eat food that's too spicy or visit a glue factory or something?
Visit a glue. But again, I think I'm going to meet her at the whiskey show in London this year. I think she's going to come down and do a chat, or we're going to do a chat together. So maybe after a couple of Blue Labels, I'll ask her. I'll have the courage to ask her all these questions and see if she gives me an answer.
Well, I popped the discount code in the chat there, folks. WS16JWBL. No prizes for what that stands for, and that will give you 15% off all the whiskies we tried tonight. This is the point in the night where we'll go back again to the question Adam asked after the first three, and we'll say what everyone's preference was. And I see some people already got there, but we'll go through some of your comments now. Andy, aka Don Smith, or the other way around, said, have to say that tonight's tasting event surpasses the others I've attended. Every whiskey is a winner, although my favorite is still Clynelish. Keep them coming, please. Well, Andy, and this goes for anyone on the chat, and Adam, it has been a fantastic tasting. Maybe we'll give you an honorary W Club membership. If you're enjoying these, folks, please do recommend a friend. We're going to keep them up going because sales have still been good, and we can't complain, but I suppose they've kind of plateaued. We kind of sell the same every tasting, so it'd be great if we could get some new palettes on and kind of expand it, and then maybe we can kind of experiment with it with kind of different, changing, different kind of whiskey ways we do it, kind of play around with it. So do recommend to a friend if you're enjoying these tastings. Yeah, we got Chris did the tour last year, which is brilliant. Gave a new aspect on blends, and as we say, your W Club membership gets you a discount on that. Graham said he was starting to get Clynelish and Clynelish, which is interesting because I mean that's brilliant. That's the night summed up, because you managed to pick out the whiskies that we had tasted so far. So here's the answers are coming in there. Blue Labels, a couple of them. Most of them appear to be, what was the second one? Was the Benrinnes. So the late edition, because as kind of Adam hinted to earlier on, that was actually originally meant to be Cardew. So the late edition is looking like it might steal the show. Have you any thoughts on that? Although Clynelish is coming back strong there as well. Have you any thoughts on that there, Adam?
I mean, I have an almost like I'm not going to say unbiased, totally biased opinion towards Benrinnes. It was again for me a very personal thing, because it was the whiskey that really stepped me into it, and I didn't realize so many people had tried or owned bottles of Benrinnes beforehand, or the guys and girls who are here today as well. So I'm going to leave Blue Label out of the equation, and I guess for me it's going to be Benrinnes, Clynelish, and Glenkinchie afterwards, and I'll just leave Blue Label to itself for the time being. But I know I've just spotted here again a lot of the comments coming in about price point, and again I can only really sing its praises in terms of you're drinking liquid history. It's the pinnacle of luxury blending as well, whilst being accessible, delicious, and being able to be used in a variety of ways as well. Again, I understand there where it sits in terms of its price point where it sits, but for me, it's almost like opening a really nice luxury bottle of champagne, right? Instead of opening luxury champagne or luxury wine, open a bottle of blue as well, and you get as much, if not more, complexity from that than you would from something like a champagne or a wine. But I know Mel said here, Adam, if you were offered a job at House of Hazelwood, would you take it? And just what's House of Hazelwood?
House of Hazelwood is a independent bottler or semi-independent bottler of whiskies from the William Grant's family reserve. So they're all premium. They're all like a grand.
Oh, amazing!
A bottle. We had a tasting with them recently. It was very good.
I
definitely am one who often brings up, as everyone on the tasting panel or on the tasting tonight would know, that I'm always saying this is great, but you have to bring in the value for money. But I think the Blue Label does hold up in that regard, and I'm not just saying that. I think it's there's a lot worse whiskies at £175. I'll tell you that, especially with
for sure.
I think what's difficult on a night like tonight is it's the fact that the first whiskies that we tried are so great value for money, and then also your drop off in the ABV, I think, which has just made it not that it's not worth it. It stands out a bit differently, in this lineup. But it's a great whiskey.
I think next time we start with Blue Label and then we make our way through. And then everyone's like, oh, it's not as good as it was whenever we started. But again, it does, especially from being the last one and coming in after Kalila as well. It really is it's hard to it's such more of an uphill struggle, more of an uphill battle for Johnnie Walker Blue, but it sits in its own sort of premium category amongst the rest. But it wouldn't be the whiskey it is today without all these previous bottles. And I know people touched on the Ghost and Rare series, so as long as people are happy to stick around, I'll touch on that as well.
Yeah, well, we could definitely touch on that. I suppose I just wanted to address James's slanderous comment there, suggesting that I've been day drinking and remembered I was tasting tonight, which is appalling and 100% not true. And I suppose the other thing is, before everyone leaves the call, we need to pick a best tasting note and best question. Now, up until then, I was actually liking James's was it a pecan pie tasting note? But after that comment, I'm not sure. Had you anyone's jumped out for you tonight, Andy?
There was. Sorry. Don't worry, I get mixed up with Andy all the time. That's my brother. He's not as good looking as I am.
Your parents didn't get very far in the dictionary, did they?
Yeah, I went from A to A. I've also got another brother called Alex as well. So really, I can see if ever the two are on Steph's chat laughing at me there. So believe me, my parents are wonderful people. I swear.
I believe it. Very busy. Oh, that's
in terms of tasting notes, I know I have to scroll all the way back, and I should have had my pen and paper set beside me, but there was some I guess James's question here as well about what's the main reason between the majority going into blends, which is a great one as well. I guess it's like that question for me is really understanding the difference between the blended whiskey market and how the single malt market came to be. So I love that question because I love talking about why a lot of our unsung heroes, things like Benrinnes, go into blended whiskey rather than just produce their own malt whiskey as well. Tasting notes, there is that Danish tree one, which is James as well, so he's not going to win that one. There's Banoffee, which is delicious. There was, let me just keep going up.
Yeah, I've been scrolling back through there. There's so many fantastic ones.
Some of these ones. There's one here which is
Bob is in the meantime. Bob had said his son is called Adam. Great choice. So
I mean, my parents get something right?
Yeah, exactly.
There was
Alex and Andy are good names as well.
They are. They're really good. They're good picks. There was one at the very start actually where even before I mentioned anything about wine or grapes, I want to say Kirsty Ashworth, which was sweet grapes, malt, and a hint of wood. And I think the grapes part on that is super important.
Brilliant. Well, we'll go for that. So, Kirsty, if you DM me the your email there, if you're still on the call, and we'll get that get a bottle sent out to you, and we'll give it to James for that question as well. In that case, despite his comments,
despite his last comment at the very end,
right? So I think I have both Kirsty and James's email address from recent comms, but do send them on anyway, so that when I look back over the chat, I can remember who won what, and there's no kind of confusion. So that deals those two. So congratulations to you two, and to Craig and the other people who won. We'll get we've got 5 winners from the chat tonight, and obviously anyone who's tagged us in a bottle will get one as well. Before we finished up, you wanted to touch on the Ghost and Rare and
yeah, of course.
Bit there, Adam.
I have a bottle of the Ghost and Rare Port Dundas here, which was open because someone last minute asked me for a tasting a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, well, I have something nice, but I don't really want to showcase. But then I did, because it's just a nice thing to do for people, right? So the Ghost and Rare series sits above Blue Label. So it's that sort of next level of being a more premium whiskey, and it started I think it started in 2017. So 2017, where Jim Beveridge decided to showcase our older whiskies in a different light. So he wanted to, instead of reskinning the bottle of Blue Label, he wanted to reintroduce Blue Label in a very different way. So we have all these amazing whiskies in reserves. So things like from Port Dundas, from Glenurry Royal, from Pittyveik, from Royal Lochnagar, from Brora. So we have these whiskies we decided, or not we, I wasn't part of the company then, but Jim decided to put into bottles called Johnnie Walker Blue Label Ghost and Rare. So it's a showcase of what a modern day version of these whiskies would have been if they were to be released today. So the first one was Johnnie Walker Blue Label Ghost and Rare Port Ellen, or was Brora. My apologies, was Brora. So there's 8 whiskies in each one, and 3 of the whiskies that are in the blend come from closed distilleries. So the Brora there was only 75 bottles created, or 75 bottles released to the public, and they're now like £3,000, £4,000 in auction. I tried to buy one and did not have £4,000 spare to buy one, so I decided not to. Then it was Port Ellen, then it was Glenurry Royal, then it was Pittyveik, and last year, Dr. Emma Walker decided to release a 5th one as her release, which is this one, which is Port Dundas. So Port Dundas closed distilleries are Port Dundas, Cambus, and Brora, and then the other whiskey inside is Glenkinchie, Cameron Bridge, Dalwhinnie, Clynelish, and it makes for, it's an elevated version or a modern day release of what Port Dundas would have been. Obviously, Port Dundas being a grain whiskey distiller, a grain whiskey producer. So in this, I would imagine there are some much older whiskies, but it's essentially a showcase of our ghost and old and rare reserves of whiskey that have been released in a much more price efficient, affordable, and accessible method for people who might not get to try a Port Dundas whiskey ever because of rare reserves or lack of bottles. So, and then the Legendary 8 is another one which some people said they had tried before, right? So someone said, first time I tasted Ghost and Rare Port Ellen, I thought it was the best whiskey I ever had. Well, I am 100% in agreement with you, where whenever I went to Menstrie and Cambus and got to try some bottles, the blending team said that whatever's on the shelf is free to taste. And there was a Ghost and Rare Port Ellen and Rora. I was like, can I try these? And they're like, yeah, go for it. And like I felt like a kid again. I just felt like a kid in a candy shop. I was like, I'll try this. And it was just unbelievable. But I agree. The Port Ellen was probably in my top 3 whiskeys I've ever tried before. James said he's got the Pittyveik Ghost and Rare, which I don't dare open for some reason. I have a full collection of Pittyveik. But I mean, Pittyveik is great. I really love the Ghost and Rare version of that. I just think it's I just think it's so accessible and so delicious, and really sort of like that has like really cacao. I don't know if you have opened it or you've tried it before, but it has this like amazing deep cacao finish. But I'll touch on the Legendary 8 as well, which is, apologies if I keep rambling. If people want me to stop, just type in the chat.
No, you're perfect. Yeah.
Great. So the Legendary 8 were the 8 distilleries that John Walker used to take whiskey from to blend whiskey before he actually started or opened his grocer shop in 1820, 1821. I had a chance to try Port Ellen Premium Ultimate 41 years, just lucky, very lucky. I got to try a Port Dundas 52-year-old about 6 years ago. With grain whiskey, it has to be much older in order to have sort of any actual, I say any quality, but to have any real depth and of character. But I know some people might have to sign off as well, but it is like a director's cut. I normally I normally charge
the Snyder cut, like whatever it's called.
I got to try this 52-year-old Port Dundas, which I still have a photo of somewhere, but it was just absolutely sensational. It was one of the first times I was really introduced to grain whiskey, and sometimes I look back and I feel spoiled. That was one of my first introductions to grain whiskey. But yeah, the Legendary 8 was the 8 distilleries that John Walker had access to before he started his actual business of John Walker and Sons Grocer Shop, or John Walker and Sons Whiskey, which I think it was really amazing to have that release, or have that style of whiskey I've made available, and to really pay homage to the original style of whiskey that would have been available, or would have been hand blended, or I say hand blended, hand blended and nose blended by John Walker himself and the other people who worked in his grocery shop at the time whenever he started his whiskey business. Those distilleries were, Clare Athol, Oban, Lagavulin, Teenanick, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, Port Dundas, Brora, Cambus, and Carsbridge. That was it. That's what I have, a little sample here that I have to go back to as well. But from what I remember, it was super zesty, really fruit driven, real sort of like fresh peaches, stewed fruit, that smoke and dark chocolate. So I want to go back and taste it, and then hopefully we can all meet and we can try a Legendary 8 all together as well. David had a 40-year-old Cameron Bridge, amazing all vanilla coconut. Was a sad day when I finished the bottle. It's always a sad day, right?
Yeah, it was the special release Cameron Bridge last year was very good. I don't know if you
26-year-old, yeah, was amazing. I got this, which is still sealed, but I got this from the Science Innovation Lab, which is the Cameron Bridge 27-year-old, cask strength at 56.2%. I guess whenever I was up there, I was like, can I have some of that? And they were like, yeah, sure. So they bottled it up, and I paid the duty on it. But I haven't opened it yet. I got it for a tasting that I really wanted to do that then fell through, unfortunately. But I'm going to use it for something special. But it's, yeah, I mean, someone just said there that David, the older grain whiskey becoming more expensive now. It's because people realize it's absolutely delicious. I was going to swear there, but I think it best not, because we're still being recorded. But yeah, I mean, I know I just rambled on there. I know I'm not sure if this has happened before in the rest of the tastings, but that was just me going off on a little bit of a tangent. But thank you all so much for
that was fantastic.
being so engaging as well, which is a lot of the time it's these things can just be me talking to people and just like talking in one direction. But yeah, it's amazing. Thank you all so much for being so engaging, being so interested, and asking so many questions and dropping in so many flavor notes. And Luke, thanks for inviting me along as well. And I mean, I had a lot of fun. I don't know if anyone else did, but I had a lot of fun.
No, I think a lot of people did. Judge by the chat, people did anyway, and hopefully anyone watching us back on the recording will feel the same. We hope to have you on again, Adam. We've had your colleagues Charlotte and Ali Reynolds. We've had on twice each.
Oh,
so, you're due a second trip on. So it's been a fantastic evening. For anyone who hasn't, there's still packs left of our next tasting next Thursday, the boutique or that boutique whiskey company, their New Zealand, Jesus, their Australian whiskey collection called Return to Oz. So definitely check that out. And we will have next week there'll be a Loch Lomond tasting going on for July. So they're the next two tastings, one that's already available and one that will be available next week. So keep an eye on those ones. And thanks again, Adam. And yeah, and if there's anything that pops up that we didn't address tonight, or if you're watching this back and you're curious about something we didn't cover, just drop me an email, and I'll either answer the question if I can or pass it on to Adam, and we'll get
of course. If there are any, if anyone wants to continue on a chat about any of the whiskey I would try tonight, or other styles of whiskey, or is ever down in London, feel free to grab my information from Luke as well. I'm more than happy to, if you're down knocking around, or if I'm up somewhere, more than happy to have a dram and a chat. But if there's anything you want to find out about, or if I can, I don't know, maybe send samples, who knows?
That would be great. Maybe, I mean, we could do even an in-person W Club, either down your way or up here.
I would love to.
Brilliant.
In terms of I know you said that you're doing that boutique whiskey company. Who's doing that tasting for you?
David, something, I can't remember his surname.
He's
sorry.
Amazing. He's I'm very lucky to know him. He's spectacular. So whoever's doing that one is in for a real treat.
Excellent. No, thank you. That's good. Listen, folks, you haven't bought a pack now. That's no excuse. You've got Adam's recommendation, folks. Brilliant. Thanks again, Adam. And we'll see you all again next week, hopefully. And yeah, we'll enjoy the rest of your evenings. It should be a long one. I mean, yesterday was the summer solstice, so hopefully there's you've got plans for the next 3 hours before it actually gets dark. So we'll see you, folks. Sláinte. Bye.